I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. Can everybody grab their seats? No. Here we go. I knew it was going to be a two-gavel day when I heard the people talking. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming to the opening of the operating budget for the City of Toronto. I'd like to call the 13th meeting of the Budget Committee to order. Of course, I'd like to welcome all members of the committee, members of council, and of course the public and the media that are here. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is in the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. If you want, you can watch on YouTube. I've had the experience of actually watching on YouTube in the past, so you can absolutely watch on Toronto City Council live on YouTube or toronto.ca/council. To begin, are there any declarations of conflict under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. This is a special meeting of the Budget Committee, the launch of the 2020 capital and operating budgets. Staff will be giving us a presentation today on the 2020 budget, and that is the only item that is actually on the agenda today. The agenda for the 2020 budget review meeting on January 15th, 16th, and 17th will be published this afternoon after the meeting adjourns. The review meeting agenda will include, and this is next Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, will include staff-recommended tax-supported budgets and the schedule for the detailed presentations from city divisions and agencies, which we will hear next, as I said, next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Just a matter of process for council members, and I repeat it every year. We will be listening to staff present their budgets next week. We will be doing what we call, and what the public may not be aware, we do briefing notes. We do requests for more information. We won't be doing that until Friday. Standard is we do it the last day of the presentation. So if any councillors have, based on the information that's been provided, requests for briefing notes, usually get them into the clerk as soon as you can, but we'll be doing that next Friday. The agenda will also include budget notes for the tax-supported programs and agencies in the City of Toronto. I would like to thank staff for their incredibly hard work that has been happening over the year to bring these budgets and preparing all the budget notes in a very, very short time frame. So on that, I'd like to have the CFO and the City Manager present the 2020 operating budget. What will happen, by the way, so after the operating budget, there will be questions of staff for budget committee members as well as visiting council members, but it will be only on the presentation. It's more high level, as you can appreciate. We'll be getting into the more of the detailed questions next week. Welcome, and it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to echo your appreciation to the many men and women of the Toronto Public Service that have spent the time to put together a budget that is balanced, and we're very proud to present to you. It must be budget day. I am wearing a tie, which is usually a good sign. With that, if we can go to our next slide. As you recall, before Christmas, and in fact at Council, you approved our rate budget. So today, it stands to reason as we launch our 2020 budget that we're going to focus today on the operating and the capital budget, but also I want to emphasize the role and importance of partnerships and our ability to deliver the 150 services that we do deliver to the citizens of this community, and the role that partners do play and will continue to play in this budget and in future budgets down the line. Next slide. So I think it's important just to send as clear a message as we can in this budget presentation that in essence, when you look at what you're going to hear in the next several minutes from an operating budget standpoint, this balanced budget keeps property taxes at inflation. As well, it preserves services and, of course, makes new investments investments to address what is a growing community, in fact, one of the fastest growing communities in North America. From a capital standpoint, and you may recall at the last time we were in front of you about a year ago, when we looked at the capital program, or at least from my own experience, it did suggest that there was a need to look at how achievable and how effective that capital program is, and so we're going to talk a bit about that today. But as you well know, critical investments have to be and are going to be made in transit and housing. And of course, as I've indicated, the role of partnerships, no different than previous years, is going to be important to this 2020 budget. Next slide. You saw this last year, and I will continue to bring it up. I think it's always, from a level-setting standpoint, important to understand the relationship between our citizens, our Torontonians, obviously my relationship and staff's relationship with you, our council, and the decisions you make, and of course the public service, which I proudly represent. And so when you look at this dynamic that we're in, the essence of public service, and you've heard me say this, is unlike the private sector, which is to earn profit, we are in the business of earning trust and confidence. And so when we think about that, and we think about the three parties that I've identified here on the slide, Torontonians, they communicate to you their aspirations. You, in return, provide leadership, and together you create a vision for this community. You communicate that vision by giving us directions, and that direction is usually grounded in good advice that we provide you, and together we formulate a strategy for delivering what is essential to this community. And then, of course, the money that Torontonians pay, whether it be taxes or fees, those are for the services that we provide. And the expectation that they have, and of course you have and we have, is that we're able to demonstrate value for that money and the services that we deliver. Next slide. So I've been here now just over a year, and I think as city managers typically do, there's a few things that the steps that we go through when we assume new positions. And so I'm incredibly proud to be here. Certainly, in assuming leadership, the first thing you do is ask questions and listen to answers. And it's really important as well to get a sense of the culture of the organization that you're working for before you start to move in any kind of particular direction. And in readying the organization, it really is about communicating an overall philosophy. And in my case, I am hugely in favor of empowering staff to do the jobs that they're paid to do. And so communicating that to the organization through a number of measures is going to be important and has been done. And then, of course, assessing talent and extending reach. So, I mean, my office, certainly I've spent some time making sure that I've got the right people in my office and that I have a good working relationship with my deputy city managers and CFO. And of course, then to start to extend my reach into the community, whether it be to the universities and colleges or to the health sector or to the private sector, to start to understand what their needs are so I can better assess how it is that we're going to be able to meet them. Obviously, we like to be successful, so we try to target early wins. And so there are a number of things that we've done, and we're going to communicate them a little bit in the next few minutes. But whether it be a strategic plan or setting the culture of an organization based on feedback from staff, or something as important as sitting at the table with the province to make sure that the city's interests in transit are being met. And so these are things that are important in order for me to establish any credibility with you and with this community. And of course, the best part of the job is the execution, is to make sure that we are delivering on your priorities and we can demonstrate it's being done in an efficient way. Next slide. I think in terms of outcomes. So when I talk about leadership in this organization, I think about not just those that are committed, those that are competent, but I also look at character of leaders that are heading up the many programs that we have here and making sure that they have the ability to lead people in the way in which I think is most effective. And of course, informed decision-making, evidence-based decision-making. So we rely on data. Anything that we're putting in front of you, we need to be able to back it up, because at the end of the day, you are rightfully going to ask questions. We have to answer them. Thirdly, results-based accountability. Now, this is really about how you measure performance in an organization. And Toronto right now has certain aspects of its civil service that is engaged in what we call results-based accountability. And in its simplest form, what results-based accountability is: how much do you do, how well do you do it, and who's better off? And so we do have pockets in our organization that report their performance in that matter, but it's not being done across the organization, and that's something I think is important. It's not unique to Toronto. There's other municipalities across North America that are doing this, and so we want to bring that best practice here. And of course, capital investment. All of you know we are responsible for a tremendous amount of assets. And, you know, as the decision was made before Christmas by this council to increase the investment in capital, it's going to be critical for us to maintain the kind of economic growth that we're experiencing. And I would argue as well as to make sure that the generations that are coming after us are going to be able to live in a community that meets their needs, not just the needs of ourselves. And of course, improving customer experience. I mean, increasingly things are becoming more and more digital, so it's important that we are able to provide service to people in the way in which they want it. And so these are the outcomes that we are certainly focused on. Next slide. Where we are from a process standpoint, the organizational state, I'm not going to read this, but organizational stability is really the first thing that you do as a city manager when you join an organization like this. Where we are right now is really about making sure that we are as effective as we need to be. So we have a corporate strategic plan, which I'm going to talk about. We're very clear about accountability. We are enhancing organizational development. We are making sure that service integration is happening, not just within this organization, but where we can integrate our services with other institutions, I think is going to be important to address some of the challenges we're facing. And of course, the organizational flexibility, focusing on customers, and making sure that we balance the scope and scale of departments. And then, of course, as that is completed, we then make sure that we are always driving efficiency. Next slide. I talked about a corporate strategic plan. I presented this to you before, in fact, last year in December. And of course, that plan, there's a vision that we have. It's a vision that's been established for some time. Trust and confidence, which I've already talked about. We have a motto, diversity is our strength, and one of the great diverse communities in the world ought to have a motto that reflects that. Our mission is to serve this city and its great people. And of course, equity. And equity comes in all different forms, but we need to strive to create and sustain equity in everything we do. And of course, when we put a budget forward, there is going to be an expectation that there is an equity lens being applied. Our people, and when I say our people, I mean our Toronto Public Service, we have a workplace culture which they've defined. Partnerships, it's the only way we get anything done, whether it's within the organization or with other institutions in this community or beyond. Performance, I've talked about. The priorities that you have here are the priorities that we've been listening to you talk about and we have heard from the community. Financial sustainability, a well-run city, maintaining and creating housing that's affordable. This is a topic that we know is near and dear to your hearts. As well with that, I would say investing in people and neighborhoods equally important. And of course, keeping Toronto moving. And when we say that, we do mean transit, but we do mean the other modes of which people move as well as goods. And then finally, and not last, not least, but tackling climate change and building resiliency. So these are the things that we've heard from you, and you're going to see in the nature of the presentation that Heather's going to do, how those priorities are reflected in this budget. So with that.
Oh, thanks, Chris. I do also want to echo the thanks that the councillor as well as Chris has mentioned with regards to city staff. As you can appreciate, a tax-supported budget is contributed to by all members of the organization across our agencies as well as our program areas and at all levels. So we don't often say thank you enough, but a sincere thank you to everyone. When I arrived a year ago, a focus of mine was financial sustainability for the city, and it started off with budget modernization. But as we've been on, or over the last few months, it's become apparent that we also need systems and processes to support sustainability. And what I'd like to do is, before we jump into the budget, take you through a bit of work that's been going on. So in order to achieve financial sustainability, we need to build on our financial reputation. And rather than reading the slide, I just want to simplify this by saying that it's really important that we have a plan, that the city has a plan that, one, is affordable, but that we have the sufficient resources to fund not only what we're investing in today, but what we're committing to for the future. The next slide. Within financial sustainability, as I mentioned, affordability is key. And we need, for simplistically, what we need to do is manage the amount of money that we're collecting today invest that money, and ensure that we're generating enough to represent what we're spending and investing in the current year, as well as committing to over the next 10 years with regards to the capital plan. Some of the work that's been underway. So as you know, the value-based outcome review report was brought to council back in December. This report that was prepared by Ernst & Young was paid for by the province, but what it did was it gave us the opportunity to look at our city services, look for opportunities to find efficiencies, look at how we could do business better, and all under the premise of preserving the existing services. The budget modernization that I mentioned, we are in the midst of a 4-year budget modernization journey. And I'm going to take you through what the differences are for year 1. But what our focus is to deliver an outcomes-based multi-year budget at the end of this term of council. In addition to the financial systems, we need systems, processes, and policies that will support informed decision-making. From an innovation perspective, the world we are operating in is changing, and it's changing rapidly, and we have to ensure that we also are responding to that change. In 2019, we introduced a pilot around blockchain. We introduced artificial intelligence, and we're going to continue to build on that in 2020, and we're also going to we are going to also implement robotics. All of these innovative processes were also recommendations that came out of the value-based outcome review. In June of 2019, we submitted a capital asset framework to the province, and this was the framework that's going to drive a capital asset management plan. And as we look at what is needed for the city's infrastructure, we need to understand or better understand the city's assets, their useful lives, the state of good repair, and the timing of investments that are going to be needed. From an organizational design perspective, how we work will change. And again, this has also been addressed in the value-based outcome review. What we need to ensure is that we have the appropriate skill sets, that we are working in a way that allows us to be nimble and flexible and responsive to the evolving workplace that we're in. From a budget modernization perspective, what you're going to experience this year is different. We have prepared a budget. We are recommending a budget that's informed by actual spending trends. So we have looked at a 5-year trend that is informing the decisions that were made in compiling this year's budget. Our capital budget has been recast, and it's recast to ensure that we are going to better reflect what's achievable and what's affordable. In addition, the materials that we're presenting are focused on outcomes, and they're to help increase the understanding of our residents of what the value of the money that they're investing in the city, and the city is turning around and investing for them. So as Chris mentioned, he did a couple of highlights with regards to this year's budget. Our operating budget does preserve services. It does make new investments, and is based on an inflationary increase. The capital budget, as I just mentioned, has been recast, but it addresses achievability, and it is making major investments in both transit and housing. We can't do this alone, and this is a theme that came out in the value-based outcome review. We know we need partnerships. And so this year's budgets also reflect the need for continued investments by other levels of government. So the numbers that everybody wants to see. Our total operating tax and rate-supported budget that staff are recommending total $13.53 billion. The rate-supported budget was already approved by council back in December. Our 10-year capital plan reflects $43.46 billion. This budget presentation is intended to be a high-level overview of the budgets. Detailed information will be available when the staff present program budgets, and those are occurring next week. The operating budget's a key document that outlines how much money the city will bring in and how much it will be invested in 2020 to deliver on legislative programs, services, and approved council strategies. What I'd like to clarify is that This is a cash budget. Municipalities are legislatively required to balance their budgets. This means that the cash that we generate is reflective of the cash that we're investing in or that we're committing to. So when we've built the budget, it's founded on 5 principles. The first one is preserving existing services. The second is that we have benchmarked the tax increase to inflation. We continue to invest in council priorities and key challenges. And this also reflects the modernized budget process that I spoke to a moment ago. It considers equity impacts on all Torontonians. So I'm going to share with you an overview. As Chris mentioned, it's a staff-recommended balanced budget. It preserves the existing services. We are making new investments to the total of $67 million in new or enhanced investments this year. It continues with government partnerships. There's an expectation that the federal government will continue to support our refugee program. There is, as I mentioned, an inflationary residential rate increase for city operations. It incorporates responsible reserve management, and we are managing the municipal land transfer tax. So in total, as I mentioned, the total operating or tax and rate operating budgets are $13.53 billion. $1.94 billion was approved in council in December, so today's focus is going to be on the $11.59 billion. What's important to understand, as I mentioned, we must have a balanced budget. So what I'd like to do is share with you where is our funding sources coming from and where is the money being invested. Our property tax is our predictable and most reliable form of income, and it comprises 38% of our total income stream. We do have federal and provincial funding that we receive for co-investments, for cost-shared programs, but I would like to highlight that there is $77 million in our budget this year that represents the expectation that the federal government will continue to fund our refugee program. That $77 million is based and supported on the information and the experience that the city has had over the last couple of years. We have the TTC fare box, user fees. I'd like to bring your attention to the reserves. These reserves are dedicated funding sources which are supported by annual contributions. For example, insurance claims, employee liability, and sick leave reserves, to name a couple. Where the money is invested. So our cost-shared social programs is the key area of where city is investing its money, $3.3 billion on an annual basis. And as I previously spoke about on the generation side, is that this represents not only the city's portion, but the amounts coming from the federal and provincial governments. The cost of operating our transit system constitutes 18.5% of the total expenditures of this budget. Emergency services, so this is our ambulance, this is our police force, this is our fire services. Corporate and capital financing. So corporate and capital financing represents what we are paying to invest in our capital infrastructure. That includes not only our debt servicing costs, but in addition to that, how much are we contributing from our operating budget to our capital budget? Other city operations includes parks, our courts, our municipal licensing operations. Governance and corporate services is our 311, to name a few. I'd like to share with you some highlights from the investments of $67 million. We've bucketed them into 5 main themes. Within poverty reduction, in public health, we will be investing $9 million in low-income seniors' dental programs. In parks, we will be investing to fund increased recreational programs, additional youth spaces, and additional youth hubs. We will be instituting phase 3 of the transit fare equity program. In climate change, As you will recall, in 2019, the city declared a climate change emergency, and we are investing money to ensure that we have a plan to achieve net zero by 2050, but looking at the feasibility to accelerate that to 2040. We're investing in our parks and in our tree canopy. In safety and security, some highlights are here that we're investing in 188 new officers for our police force. We are investing in new paramedics. We have 71 new paramedic service staff. We are investing in keeping our buildings safe, fire and life safety program. In addition to that, we are investing in road safety, making Vision Zero investments. In the transit area, and this is on the operational side, we are investing in increased service reliability, and this includes adding over 100,000 added service hours. That will require an additional 121 transit operators. In other city priorities, there's a series of items, just to highlight a few. This involves additional resources for equity inclusion, additional resources for our accountability officers, additional resources for culture programming, just to name a few. Now, as Chris and I have both mentioned, this is a staff-recommended balanced budget. What we've done is we've made it look really easy. We've summarized for you some of the balancing strategies that are incorporated this year. So as mentioned, we have a 2% inflationary increase on the residential tax rate. That generates $63 million annually. In addition to that, there has been a TTC fare increase approved by the TTC board, which will generate $32 million. As you all know, municipal land transfer tax fluctuates from year to year, and we are taking some of the increase that we've experienced in 2019 and including that in the 2020 budget. As committed last year, when a policy was adopted to remove and eliminate the solid waste rebate, we are in year 2 of 3-year elimination. This will save us $25 million. The value-based outcome review identified opportunities for us to find efficiencies. I'll go over that in a few minutes, but we have put $51 million in this year's plan. As I mentioned, we have gone to a budget that is based on actuals rather than a budget over budget. And through that exercise, we have found efficiencies and we have identified opportunities to reduce the amount that is being allocated out to programs. That does not necessarily mean it's a cut. What it means is that we have the appropriate resources based and informed by our actual historical results. And in addition to that, our agencies and program areas have offered up another $108 million in savings. As I said, this probably makes it look very easy, but it's been months of work and negotiating with our program areas to ensure that they've got the appropriate resources to meet their commitments. The value-based outcome review informed us that there are opportunities to do our business differently. We have committed to $51 million in savings, and this will be achieved over a 2-year period. The main component of this savings is how we procure. When you look at our procurement, we are going to be changing how we procure. We will be looking at procuring in a different time frame. We will be looking at coordinated procurement, and we will be looking at procurement and coordinating it across all cities and agencies. As I mentioned, we have a $77 million expectation that the federal government will continue to support our refugee program. There is information and data to demonstrate to the federal government that we have a demand, that the city continues to attract refugees on a regular basis. This $77 million is above the request of 2019, but our experience and the data that shows from that experience is that the true cost of the flow of the refugees coming into the city and housing them in our shelter programs will require $77 million. we can't be silent on partnerships. As I just mentioned, there is an expectation that the federal government will continue to support us on the refugee file. But a year ago, we did not have a partnership with the province around our subways. So this year, and I'll speak to it in the capital plan, we are able to address the fact that the monies in previous years focused on expansion can be redirected to state of good repair. In addition to that, a year ago, we did not have a partnership, a co-investment partnership with the federal government to help fund the state of good repair backlog at Toronto Community Housing Corp. So with these partnerships, we've been able to make significant progress. What I'd like to do now is say share with you the everyday impact of our property tax. So as mentioned, it's an inflationary increase. That inflation rate of 2% is based on a 12-month CPI rate. It was taken in November, as this is the timing of us compiling our budget. And we do have city policy as well as provincial regulations that require our commercial, our industrial, and our multi-residential rates to be a reflection of our residential rate. Our commercial rate will continue to be at 50% of our residential rate, resulting in a 1% increase. Our industrial will be a third of our residential rate, and multi-res will remain at 0. The average of these increases is 1.43%. On the average tax bill, it will be an increase of $61. We have talked about the City Building Fund levy, the extension that was approved by Council in December. This levy that is going to occur over the next 6 years will support us in funding transit and housing needs to the tune of $6.6 billion. This continuation of this extension of the City Building Fund will in actual fact impact the average tax bill by $45. So this slide actually represents what does an average tax bill look like. So given the fact that we have a $61 inflationary increase, we have a $45 City Building Fund levy, the total tax bill for the average resident in Toronto will be $3,141, which is a reflection of a $106 increase. Where does your money go? How do we invest your money for the city services? 73%, as you can see from the yellow bars, 73% of the average tax bill will pay for public safety, it'll keep the city moving, and invest in the city's infrastructure. Now I'm going to switch to the capital budget. The capital budget is a plan that guides our decisions on our investments, not only how much we're investing, but when we're investing. So the guiding principles for our capital budget is that we had to address the achievability and the affordability of the capital plan. It reflects recent council commitments, it reflects other government partnerships, and it develops, and it's the initiation of the development of a capital asset management plan. I just want to explain what achievability and affordability actually means. So a year ago, when Chris and I were presenting our first City of Toronto budgets, we actually identified the need to recast the capital plan. We knew that the historical rates of achieving approximately 60 to 62% of the capital budget needed to be addressed. In addition to that, the value-based outcome review also signaled the achievability and affordability concerns and risks by E&Y. What we are doing this year is introducing and furthering, in some instances, industry best practices around stage gating of projects. What this means is that we are going to have a better estimate of not only what we need to spend, but when we need to spend it. City Council has a policy of a debt service ratio of less than 15%. We can now say that we are living within that 15% ratio every single year of the capital plan. We can also say that the plan is now affordable. This plan reflects predictable, reliable funding sources. So I'd like to give you a bit of an overview about the capital budget. We are investing a total of $13.2 billion in transit. This nearly doubles the investment in state of good repair. The City Building Fund levy that has been extended is now going to support $6.6 billion dedicated in transit and housing. As I mentioned, a year ago, we did not have an arrangement, a co-investment partnership with the federal government to fund the backlog of state of good repair for Toronto Community Housing Corporation. We have received $1.34 billion from the federal government, and we are putting in $1.6 billion into the capital plan. As mentioned before, we also, a year ago, did not have a partnership with the provincial government with regards to transit. This arrangement has allowed us to redirect our funds and invest them in the state of good repair. And these are the funds that had been originally dedicated to expansion. We have recast the plan to reflect industry best practices. We have recast the plan to reflect affordability. We are now living and complying within our 15% debt service ratio, and we have realistic funding contributions. So what I'd like to do is share with you for the 10-year capital plan, where does the funding source come from and where is the money being invested? So the City Building Fund levy supports $7.3 billion over the next 10 years. We do issue debt on an annual basis, and we will continue to do so. We do contribute from our current operations money into the capital plan. We do receive money from the federal government for infrastructure development, as well as gas tax money. We do draw from reserves, the capital financing reserves. The capital financing reserve is funded by MLTT on an annual basis. We receive provincial gas tax funding. We have recoverable debt, and we also have DCs, Section 37s and Section 42s. But more importantly, where is the money being invested? As I mentioned, we're nearly doubling our state of good repair investment in transit. We are now going to be spending almost 47% of our overall capital plan on transit. We are investing in housing. We are investing $2.6 billion in housing, but we are also contributing $2.7 billion through foregone revenue into our housing TO plan. Transportation, which is our road rehab, including the Gardner, we have 18% of our budget dedicated to road rehab and the Gardner. Environment, so this is for flood mitigation and park development and our Toronto Regional Conservation Authority. Our corporate real estate reflects our buildings and key projects such as St. Lawrence Market. In the other category, this represents our fleet, our library renewals, as well as repairs. Our 10-year capital plan reflects the principles measured. We can now say that we'll have enhanced achievability. We will reflect the current market conditions and market capacity to respond to the demands that the city is putting on it. And we have affordable funding sources. So finally, to summarize, our budget for 2020. Our operating budget is based on our tax operating budget is based on an inflationary tax increase that preserves services but makes new investments. Our capital budget has addressed achievability as well as making significant investments in transit and housing. and our partnerships. We have new partnerships, but we expect existing partnerships to continue. So the budget schedule. Today is our launch, and over the next couple of weeks, we have additional budget committee meetings that will allow program areas to present and explain more details around their plans. There are opportunities also for the public to get involved, for public deputations, for in-writing deputations, for us to focus on a budget committee wrap-up by the end of January, to go to executive committee mid-February, and to take to council by the end of February as well. There are opportunities, many opportunities for the public to get involved by making, as I mentioned, deputations in person, written deputations, just to go online and review the materials which will be posted on our website following this meeting. But we look forward to continued conversation around the 2020 budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather and Chris. So what we're going to do now is we'll get into questions of the presentation. We'll start with, of course, outside councillors, and there are a few here. I just wanted to recognize former councillor Janet Davis, who is also joining us today. She has always been our honorary budget committee member, and she's going to continue doing that as a private citizen now. So unfortunately, she won't be able to ask questions, but I think in spirit, many of her. Oh, I'm not worried about that. I was anticipating and looking forward to that. So anyway, so what we'll do is we will go to questions of staff on the presentation, the overall budget, and I'll begin with outside councillors who would like to ask questions. Councillor Perks.
So looking at the capital plan, I note that if you take the Gardner out, the state of good repair backlog continues to grow. How much does it grow by in real terms over the length of the plan? There's a chart on page 54, but it doesn't give actual dollar figures.
Councillor Perks, we can prepare a briefing note that will give you that detail.
Okay, but I'm reading it right, that in rough terms, it's somewhere around, and this is excluding the Gardner, 7 billion now, and it will be in excess of 12 billion at the end of the plan. Is that roughly right?
That's correct.
Where's the lion's share of that? Like, which departments or asset classes are going to be seeing a $5 billion increase in state of good repair backlog? The problem is that unlike the operating budget, where you've provided previous year's spending, the capital slide or the capital appendix you provided doesn't give us previous years. So I just don't know where this growth is taking place.
Through the chair, the details on the changes in the SOGR backlog will be available in each of the detailed budget notes for the programs. Overall, the backlog will grow to about $8 billion over the 10-year term. The significant changes of that would be within the transportation services area, as well as within corporate real estate and city facilities, as well as within TTC.
And parks?
As parks would be the fourth item.
Parks is going to be growing, right? Like
Not to the degree of the first three, but it would grow as well.
It's growing, okay. I noticed that the total slides for capital spend seem to be declining in the first year of the program. Are we compared to the 2019 10-year plan, the 2020 10-year plan, it looks to my eye like the total spend is decreasing. Is there going to be a list of the capital programs that have been pushed off or cut altogether, or is that going to be provided to us?
Through the chair, the overall capital program, when compared to last year's capital program, will increase by about $1.7 billion overall. There has been some adjustments as we recast and review our ability and achievability to spend our capital spend rates. There are some reductions within city programs. You have some reductions within transportation. IT and fleet would probably be the three biggest ones, but we're continuing to work with those programs, as well as we've made some changes in the way that we allow for programs to accelerate funding. So if there's a demonstrated ability to do more than we have in any given year, we're going to work with those programs and allow them to accelerate funds from year 2 into year 1.
So are we going to get a list of the programs that were slated for 2020 in the capital plan that are not in last year's capital plan? That were slated for 2020 and that are...
Through the chair, within each of the detailed budget notes, we have a capacity to spend section, which talks to the initiatives that were taken in terms of smoothing out some of the capital spending and detailing the shifts.
I'm going to have to go hunting and fishing to find it. Okay. I noticed that there are 22 positions being removed from social development, finance, and administration. What are those positions?
SDF&A is 11.
Oh, sorry, 11. Apologies.
To the chair, those positions are as a result of not receiving federal funding for some of our safety initiatives.
Community safety initiatives?
Yes, they were ones we anticipated funding for that we won't be receiving.
So because we didn't receive the federal funds, we're going to be making less of an investment than we initially intended in violence prevention programs. Is that correct?
Not quite.
Okay.
Those resources were anticipated to be intergovernmentally funded. They do not impact the city's funding commitments to community safety.
Right. So because we didn't get funding from other orders of government, we're going to be making a smaller than anticipated investment in communities in order to prevent violence.
Last question.
Social development is supportive of the city investments and the prioritization that the city is doing for community safety initiatives next in the 2020 budget.
Thanks. Any other questions from outside councillors? Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you. Can you confirm the debt service charges for the capital budget?
Through the chair, the debt service charges will be $666 million.
And that has been growing year over year. I don't see that number ever going down. Is that correct?
I only have, through the chair, I only have 2018 actual numbers in front of me, along with the projection, and it does appear that it is increasing, yes.
What is the difference between the debt service charges this year and last year, since you have the 2018 numbers in front of you?
Through the chair, 2018's actuals are $558 million.
And what is causing the big jump?
Through the chair, so when we go out to service our debt, the debt ranges in timelines. Some debt is repaid over 10 years, some is 20, some is 30. Depending on the mix of our debt, the debt service, the debt charges reflect not only the cash required on an interest basis, but also the principal. And so depending on the mix of our debt, we might have a shorter time frame that might be required to repay versus a longer time. So it actually just depends on the mix of our debt instruments.
I guess my question is with respect to the $100 million that's gone up over the past 12 months, just exclusively for debt service. So we're talking about paying interest rates, which somebody else is benefiting. Nobody, the taxpayers aren't getting greater value for that payment. What has caused that $100 million jump?
Through the chair, in actual fact, we are investing more in capital, which is why we're going out and raising up to $1 billion a year in debt. And so I would say that the public does benefit by that investment because we're investing more in capital. on an annual basis.
Does this have anything to do with the streetcars or perhaps infrastructure that's set behind, that goes over budget or falls behind construction schedules?
Through the chair, that would be a difficult statement or conclusion to draw because the funding is not, it's on an overall basis. It's not specific to a specific item.
And would it be possible to quantify the actual additional investments in capital? Because I see that our debt charges are going up, so that's clearly the number that seems to grow. But I think just by way of assessing, it sometimes feels like the roads are in worse conditions, housing is crumbling, and yet our debt service continues to grow. So I think it's hard to be able to correlate and bring into focus that those $100 million spent is actually getting better results. The cost of borrowing continues to go up. Our debt continues to rise there.
Through the chair, the actual cost of borrowing is decreasing.
Lower.
Our debt service is going up, as I mentioned, because when we go out into the market, we choose different instruments that have different repayment periods, and the repayment period influences the debt charge.
So you're saying that the cost of borrowing is going down, but the amount borrowed is going up?
That's correct.
That's correct. And with respect to any of the projects that have gone over budget that we had not allocated in sufficient contingencies for, does that then become capital debt? Is that how we finance that? So whether it's, for example, if we get a additional surprise bill on the Gardner, or we see the North Market being over budgeted, behind construction schedule, how do we finance that when the contingency doesn't cover it?
Through the chair, as mentioned when we went through the capital slide, there are multiple funding sources. So it does depend on which capital program you're specifically relating to. When it's a federal grant, we in turn submit. So if something was to go over budget and it was federally funded, it wouldn't necessarily be debt. If it's a program that is primarily debt funded, then specific to your question, then yes, it would be debt. You also saw that the contribution from our current operations also funds capital projects. So it's not an easy statement to say that if something goes over, we're funding it through debt.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from outside councillors? Councillor Filion.
I assume that when the other materials comes out, we'd be able to determine all of the data related to the Gardner Expressway, the total cost of that over what period of time, and is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
And is there any simple way of determining what that has pushed out, how that has increased related to the state of good repair and other items or new projects that can't be funded because of what we're putting into the Gardner?
Through the chair, the decision funding on the Gardner program is not substantially changed through the 2020 budget. The funding approved for the Gardner was approved in prior years and has not had any impact on any of the projects that we would include in the program in this year's 10-year capital budget and plan.
Of public banking legislation for city.
Well, the Gardner did push out some other items, correct?
So in prior year budgets where there's an identification of available funding sources to be applied towards the Gardner would have been able to utilize those funding sources as opposed to those funding sources being applied to other projects. Those decisions would have been made in past budgets. This budget reflects those prior decisions.
But has there not been items that were in the budget that have been pushed into the unfunded category because of the Gardner?
Not in the not through the 2020 budget process.
Investing in because the Gardner's
So you'd have to go back and search through what was previously funded and, or planned to be funded, and is it still planned to be funded to determine that?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take it to Budget Committee members. Questions of staff? Well, there we go. Councillor Layton will.
Yes, thank you very much. On page 22 of the slide deck, can we just talk through, because I'm trying to figure out where we're going to have to look to get some of the details for these numbers, because this is essentially half of the ledger of how we're balancing the budget. On the third point, municipal land transfer net change. So is that we're making an assumption that it will be $31 million more next year?
Through the chair, as in past years, we're budgeting MLTT revenue consistent with our 2019 experience. One of the major changes that we're making this year is of the increase that we're experiencing in 2019 above the budget, we're not applying all of it to support ongoing operations. In fact, approximately half of the increase is being applied to help grow the health of our reserves.
The tax stabilization reserve,
Correct.
which in 2015 was at, that's on one of the appendices. I saw the number, it was under 30 million or something like that.
I can get that for you. I have it available.
Not terribly stable, not a nice cushion to
No,
land on.
correct. And through this year's process, one of our goals was to grow the health of our.
So what is that 31 number?
So what we've seen through the chair, what we've seen this year is an expected increase of approximately 64 million in the MLTT. And what we've done is of that increase, 31 million has gone towards operations to be able to support the ongoing expenses of operations to preserve and expand city services.
Our assumption is actually that the MLTT is something to the tune of $60 million more than last year.
Through the chair, that's correct.
And it does, like early indications this year that the real estate market is growing steadily. Let's just hope that continues. The federal government refugee contributions, did they contribute the amount we anticipated they did last year, the 45?
Through the chair, yes.
They did. And you're relatively confident that they'll come through again?
Yes.
Okay. The solid waste rebate year 2 of 3, is next year's rebate the same amount that we'll get to the budget, or is it less? Because this year the rebate was half of the small, and I get to talk about the rebate, everyone. I get to talk about the rebate. Half of the small and the rest of the medium.
Through the chair, that's correct.
And
This
next year, what's left?
So through the chair, next year would be the remaining half of the small. Are you asking in terms of total
Yeah, what's
dollars?
the total dollars?
So with this year, it's 25 million. Next year's would be 10.
So this year, we're offsetting a 1% tax increase with that 25 million. Next year, it's only worth about a third.
Not quite 1%, but close.
But come on, round numbers. The value-based outcome review recommendations, they're 50 million, but it says over 2 years. Does that mean there's another 51 million next year? Or is it 25 million a year?
So through the chair, when we look at contract compliance of 2 million, we know that that will be a continuing theme. When we look at procurement, we know that that will be a continuing theme. So because we are going to be budgeting based on our actual experience, that is going to be expected to be repeated.
An additional 50 million, or that 50 million will also save next year?
We fully anticipate that the way we're going to change how we're going to do business will continue to deliver savings. So as mentioned there, we'll have 20 million this year. And in addition to that 20, we will have 20 million next year.
So, and I'm going to try to move quickly. There's an efficiencies line at 27 million, then a program and agency savings line at 108 million. What's the difference?
Through the chair, the efficiencies line demonstrates actions that were taken to be able to deliver services more efficient while maintaining services. The program and agency line, similar to past years, is where we would work with our programs and agencies on the initial pressures that were identified at the beginning of the process and looking at opportunities to be able to accommodate some of those pressures through
Without impacting service levels?
without impacting service levels.
Now, how are we going to be able to tell if our we're budgeting to actuals, whether or not things like gapping or holding positions vacant in prior years that have persisted, and we had these conversations throughout, so I know you can't be surprised. How are we going to be able to tell that that won't impact a service level in this sort of new way of doing the budget?
So through the chair, we don't have gapping this year. So our numbers are informed by the actual needs that the city has experienced that are required to deliver on the existing services and the existing service levels. So we have eliminated the concept of gapping. So salary and wages have been adjusted for the experience that staff have had in previous years.
And how are we going to be able to tell whether or not that holding positions vacant for a certain amount of time are going to impact service levels?
So through the chair, one of the components of our budget modernization is to actually focus on outcomes. So we are focused on what are the outcomes each of the program areas is trying to achieve. So we're not as concerned about the complement as we are concerned about the outcome. We're looking at cost drivers of that outcome, but we're focused on the actual outcome. So to your question about how are we going to know, we will be monitoring the service commitments that are made or the performance outcomes that we're trying to measure and track.
And you'll be presenting those in the budget, division by division, or all as an appendices to?
So through the chair, you'll see when you see the budget notes, you will see that they're outcomes focused.
I'm going to let Gary cut me off now because I'm over time and he's indulged me. Thank you.
Trying to be a bit flexible here. So any other questions? Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, my questions are going to kind of be focused on the modernization process of our budget today. That's mainly what we have in front of us here. So as we're looking to modernize the budget, this is a process that we kind of started last year and are embarking on going forward. I think that's great. I'm wondering, there was a lot of discussion around outcomes-based budgeting to help keep our services operating more efficiently. Could you explain how an outcomes-based approach will actually achieve that?
So through the chair, when we initiated the budget modernization process, there was a lot of consultation about what people experienced, what they understood. It was a very technical, focused budget that was not necessarily emphasizing what we felt the value of the city's services represented. And so by shifting the conversation to outcomes, Chris mentioned results-based accountability. So what are we trying to achieve when we spend money? What are we trying to achieve? What is the program's purpose? And by identifying the metrics that will demonstrate that not only to council but to the public, that allows us to focus on the metrics and the outcomes as a commitment rather than just the dollars invested.
So I think the metrics that we choose to emphasize, perhaps being ones that resonate with Torontonians the most, are we anticipating that as this modernization continues to evolve over the next several years, we will be seeing more engagement? Do we have any metrics to evaluate how Torontonians are actually engaging with our budget, and if this is actually going to achieve that?
So through the chair, the modernization process will get us to a position where we will have a multi-year perspective, and we would like to think that we will be consulting with the public up front rather than at the end of the budget process. But it's an evolution. It's an evolution in how we convey the information.
That makes a lot of sense to me, doing the engagement on the front to inform the budget discussions. Have we thought, or could we think about ways that we can provide some quants and actually measure some of that engagement stuff to see if we're making headway in the direction we want to go?
Through the chair, the short answer to that question is yes. The good news in terms of results-based accountability, you have certain services in your organization that already do RBA. Your fire department does it as well as your public health. It's now taking that best practice and applying it across the organization. So there will be a need to do more upfront consultation. And so we will have, I think, a better opportunity to know what people are experiencing and be able to reflect it when we come in front of you and present a budget in terms of, not just, here are the services, but here's what we're actually achieving in these services, and have the people that experience it be able to have a voice in our budget. So that's our goal.
Teeing up on that, the results-based accountability, what does that look like in some of our longer-term plans, whether that's our housing TO, new program, or 5-year service plan at the TTC? What would that look like, sort of at a high level on long-term plans like that?
That's a great question, and I don't know if I can do it justice in a minute.
Okay.
So I think there's an opportunity for us to come back to you to show you in more detail exactly how does this not just work with the services we deliver right now, but how it could work in demonstrating that the critical investments in TTC are paying off and achieving what you as really policy leaders want us to achieve. And but we can certainly, I think, is something, if you want to give us some direction here in terms of giving you a bit of a précis on the results-based accountability program and what it does achieve. And again, we're not the first to be doing it. This is something that's been applied, I know, across Canada. And I know, in fact, it originated in the United States. And so we're already starting to train our staff to know how to produce this kind of information. So.
Okay, I would like to see that considered a little bit in the context of perhaps those two programs in particular, or others. I guess with the last question, I just, something that I and many folks, both on the political and civil service side, find frustrating is spend rates and not getting the dollars out the door. So we make a policy decision and we decide, all right, this is something that we want to do. We allocate money and then we spend like 60% of it and don't achieve the outcomes that we want. So how, we did talk a little bit about spend rates, but I want to understand how those changes that we're making in the budget modernization process between allocation and actuals, how we're going to tighten that gap and get better performance.
Well, I think through the chair that you're hitting the really essence of what bothered some of us last year when we saw over about a 5-year period, a spend rate of somewhere between 60 to 62% of your capital program. Mm-hmm. We know what's going on in other parts of the country in terms of, in a normal or a better example of spend rates is at least 75% or better. And so that's really part of the modernization of our capital program that Heather's talked about, is to make sure that, when we put projects in front of you, that, we can demonstrate that they're in fact getting done in the manner in which we predict it. And those projects that are ready, that if we can advance them earlier, that we want to do it. And along with that, and one thing we haven't said here is that the actual value you get for your capital dollars should matter to all of us. And so when you issue construction work at certain times in the year, and you don't have the flexibility to issue it at other times of the year when the market may be a little bit more receptive to what you're offering, you don't always get as good value as you can. So that's one of the things that we want to bring forward here is the opportunity to bring capital work into the market at such a point in time to get maybe the best value for that dollar.
Well, thanks, staff, for all their work on this. Appreciate it. A lot of work.
Any other questions? Councillor McKelvey, then Carol.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking through what this means for the average homeowner, and I just want to make sure I have the numbers right. So I think it's $61 on property tax, $45 for the levy. And then I was just wondering if somebody could just re-summarize what was the increase for garbage and water, because then we could kind of get the complete picture, and I didn't see those numbers in this presentation.
Off memory, it was 3% for water, and I believe 2.4% residential for solid waste, but we can verify that that's the actual.
If you could get it at the same kind of comparison, like on the dollar value per homeowner. And just, I think it's important we look at that kind of as a package, because then we also have 10-cent fare increase, right? So when we're looking at affordability, we have to look at everything that's coming out of people's pockets on a annual basis. Page 55, I just had a question about the comparators. I have the privilege to live right beside Pickering, and many of my residents work in Pickering or play in Pickering, even though they live in Scarborough. And so they talk, and one of the things they always talk about is how much Pickering pays versus how much Toronto pays. And I just noticed that on page 56 and 57, you have included solid waste collection in the comparison, but like I didn't see that included on 55. So is that in here or not in here, or why not? Like they seem different between the three.
Through the chair, so we're providing different views of the cost to the residents. So slide 55 gives a comparison purely on the property tax, but acknowledging that solid waste is not on the city's property tax, but is in other municipalities. We provide the other slide to give a comparison, an apples to apples comparison.
So when you look at 55, I think Pickering's solid waste is included, or did you break it out where it was included? So you're just looking at the property part and you've pieced that off?
Through the chair, it's correct.
Okay, so you've pieced off so this is totally a apples to apples comparison for this. Okay, thank you, that is helpful. For the capital spends, typically the spend comes in around 80%, is that right? Or what's our average capital spend been in the past?
Through the chair, our 5-year average is in the range of 60 to 65% on an annual basis.
Okay, and where for operating, you're now budgeting against actuals. Are we also doing that for capital?
So through the chair, capital is budgeted differently because it's not based on historical, because each project is different. So what we're doing is we're looking at what triggered the differences in the sense of why did we not achieve a higher percentage than 60. So when I mentioned that we're introducing stage gating, which is an industry best practice, it's about how you estimate and how your estimates mature over the planning cycle. And so when we talk about better understanding of timing of when we actually need the cash, a better understanding of when we're going to have solid estimates that allow us to allocate the funding offsets to it. That is what we've done with regards to stage gating and achievability.
Now, through that stage gating process, though, is that similar to, it doesn't mean that it's coming back to council more times, or is it just more in the way that you're operating internally with that stage gating?
It's actually a combination of both. So for something that is not in the 10-year capital plan, it would come back through a budget process. For an item that is in the capital plan that still needs to mature, it will go through our planning process. So as mentioned, that we also are adopting policies and processes that allow us to look at our capital plan and know that perhaps we go into the market at a different time to get a better price, or we are going to start procuring on a 12-month basis versus only on a 9-month basis. If if a project is in the capital plan and it can be accelerated to get better results, then we're able now to accelerate it as long as it's in the capital plan. It doesn't have to come back to council.
Okay, perfect. That's what I was interested in, is this acceleration that if we were to scale back to budgeting against actuals, but yet we were actually achieving the successes that we'd like to, is there ways to accelerate? So you're working that all in. Will that be presented to us in some way through this process or offline on how that process is being updated for the way we're doing the budgeting with the capital?
Through the chair, yes, we've built some materials internally that speak to some of the changes that we're making in the processes to help facilitate higher capital spend rates and ensure we're getting in front of the market prior to budgets. So that's available, and we can make it available to council.
And then my last question is, in terms of saying that through this budget, there's no decrease in services, what is the process that we have for program closeout? Because sometimes the program's just not working. So we actually do want to decrease that service. So we don't want to just indefinitely keep programs or services that are out of date or not working. So how is that decision being made through this budget process?
So through the chair, if there was a program that was intended to be sunsetted in the sense of, a time-limited funding mechanism from another level of government, that would be flagged. So that wouldn't be captured in that same bucket. If there was a program that was being evaluated that we didn't feel the outcomes were driving the right results, again, now that we're focused on outcomes, outcomes that would enable us and position us and have the data to inform that conversation to have with council.
Thank you, and thank you for your great presentation this morning.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carroll.
Oh, I'm already on. Thank you. I'll get my usual question out of the way first. The debt ceiling slide, whose page I have now forgotten. Oh, page 52. So we now have a little space between our budget and the debt ceiling. How much of that is the impact of increasing the city levy? Is the city levy included on that red line?
Through the chair, no, that is not the impact of the city. That's the impact of, through the process this year, one of our objectives was to ensure that we were maintaining under the 15% limit in each and every year. The city building levy, because it has its own dedicated source, is not of revenue, is not applied against this limit.
So where would that red line be, and how far would we be from the debt ceiling if when we said debt charge as a percentage of tax levy, we included all of the tax levy? How healthy are we if we put that red line in real terms?
Through the chair, in actual fact, the purpose of the debt service ratio is to identify where you need resources to fund and service debt that you don't actually have a recurring, predictable form of revenue.
Right. But
levy-
if we move from budget to our financial statement, which you'll do later this year, what I'm trying to measure is solvency. What's our debt per capita ratio, as I ask every year, and hope every year that it will be a slide in the presentation, yet never is. What is our actual debt per capita ratio in the City of Toronto?
Through the chair, we can get that.
That would be wonderful. I could get a briefing note that if we book the levy in, and I understand that it is so dedicated that there's a danger in it, I'm just trying to predict what will really look like at the end of the year. So if I could get a briefing note that really tells people what every Torontonian would pay tomorrow to make us solvent, that would be wonderful. In the comparisons of property taxes with the GTA in Ottawa, have we included the levy there so that we're really looking at what Torontonians will really pay this year? Or is that exclusive of the levy as well, the city building levy?
Through the chair, the levy is included because this is based on an average tax bill.
Okay, but including what they'll pay in the city building levy?
That's included in the average tax bill.
Okay, and which page will I see that on? That's included in the one that's where it's listed in dollars on 56?
Through the chair, it would be all three.
All three, okay, because otherwise I think we'd be vulnerable to a bit of criticism. So in anticipation of when we get into the more detailed questions, when we're doing the budget next week, there are different kinds of reductions here in the operating budget. There's pulling out the gap positions, there's something called value-based savings, and then there's real more traditional efficiencies, real cuts. Will we get a more detailed overview of that? 51 million in value-based savings. Will we get a real understanding of what those are? I mean, I'm concerned, my first line I look at is always childcare. Is there any childcare reduction in value-based savings, and what would that be?
Looking at the slide 23, there are no reductions from the value-based outcome review recommendations in childcare
Okay.
that we've incorporated.
So will we get that 51 million broken down?
Through the chair, this is the breakdown. We know where there are.
I guess what I mean is divisional breakdown?
So through the chair, the majority of these savings are corporate savings, so they're not represented or reflected in the divisional budgets.
Okay. And you sort of told us a bit about the procurement piece that doing things a different way, you think you can achieve 20 million each year. That's pretty huge. How much of that is doing it a different way? You still have to abide by the law, so I'm not too nervous about that. How much of that is doing it a different way versus really doing that, addressing capacity to spend, and we're just plain not going to be doing any procurement? So we're going to save because he's things he's not going to have to buy.
Through the chair, actually, this is not on the capital side whatsoever. This is all on the operating side. We do have a pipeline of opportunities where we are considering, as I mentioned, purchasing power. So it's a term used called category management. And so by coordinating purchasing across the city rather than in pockets at different times throughout the year, we can actually utilize our purchasing power to get better pricing. In addition to that, by procuring 12 months of the year versus just in certain months is also opportunity for us to find additional savings. So we do have a pipeline of where we feel there are real savings, and actually to a significant extent, we're very well on our way to finding the 20 million for 2020.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I guess I'll want to know what divisions that impacts, because if we're going to anticipate being able to do that every year for a couple of years, we're really going to want to know if it has a real potential for success.
So through the chair, I will say that we did pilot it in 2019, and we had enormous.
Oh, okay, so you already have a measure of whether or not it can succeed. Okay, that gives me great comfort.
Last
and,
question.
Yeah, last but not least, when I do look at, if I can go back to childcare for a minute, I see 33 positions down. I don't know how much of that is eliminating gapping. How much gapping altogether is positions just disappeared, and if they ever wanted to come back, they'd be new and enhanced? Is that part of the 33 positions gone in childcare?
Through the chair, the 33 positions for childcare are primarily related to service rationalization.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Service rationalization. So we had, under the legislation, school boards are now required to operate before and after school programs where there's a demand. So a number of our directly operated before and after school programs have transferred into the schools and are now being operated by school boards, ensuring that children are receiving the same service in the school with their peers. So most of those positions relates to that change in service.
But with so many young expectant moms and a growing child populations, a growing enrollment in the school, would we not take that efficiency and use it to realize more childcare services at a time when we need them?
Through the chair, we do have a capital plan, and we are continuing to grow childcare in the 0 to 4 age
But
group.
you'll have to beg for the new positions if we take them out this year. It would be a new and enhanced operating impact of capital as they come back.
Through the chair, as new programs open, that's right, we would add those new positions for new programs.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's it for this week. Yeah.
Any other questions? Councillor Nunziata.
Yes, I just have one question. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. Just one question. As far as the savings, included in the savings, is that, because as you know, in the past couple of years, the Auditor General has brought forward a number of recommendations where we can find savings efficiencies. Are the savings included in that, in the amount of the savings that we have accumulated?
Through the chair, yeah. So in reviewing each of the program's budgets as they came forward, and you'll see it in your detailed budget notes, there's a section in there for savings that were generated through AG recommendations, and that would form part of the ability for us to find program and agency savings through the course of the budget reviews.
Okay, thank you. That was it.
Thank you. Just have a couple of questions myself. What is the tax stabilization reserve? And what sort of amount should it be at, generally?
Through the chair. If you refer to slide 49, I think it's 49, the reserve is forecasted to be approximately 96 million. We target to have 2% of the tax levy as our balance. As you can see on the chart on the right, the 2020 balance is forecasted to be the highest it's ever been. That being said, I want to qualify that statement. as much as we are making a concerted effort to make it healthier, and it appears to be healthier, we also have to have a contingency fund. So as you know, we've put in an expectation that the federal government will continue to fund the refugee file. We have to have a safety net. If there was any shortfall in that commitment, we would have to tap into the tax stabilization reserve. So as much as it is getting healthy, we also know that there are some contingencies that we earmark to offset it.
So as part, again, it's critically important that that tax stabilization be as healthy as possible going into the budget process. In years past, and you just maybe comment, there has been criticisms that we've been using one-time reserves, primarily of tax stabilization, to balance the budget. With this 2020 budget, that's not the case?
Through the chair, that's correct. It's not the case this year. We're making a concerted effort to actually limit the amount of withdrawals and ensure that we are contributing to the reserve, which is what Steve spoke to earlier with regards to taking some of the MLTT increase from 2019's experience and directly attributing it to this reserve.
Perfect. Doing that at the beginning of the process instead of waiting for the surplus to come later on in the year. Thank you. Seeing no other questions, I want to, first of all, again, Can I have a second round? Councillor Perks, that is really up to the committee to have a second round. Are there other councillors who want? Are there other councillors that have more questions? Or understanding the challenge, of course, in this meeting, it's we want to just start digging deep into the budget. I respect that. So if the questions are generally on the presentation, I'd probably be fine if the other members are doing another. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. So I'll be very. Okay, Councillor Perks.
Thank you. You said in response to an earlier question that by going from budget to actual to, or sorry, from budget to budget to budget to actual, positions that had been shown as gapped in previous years were eliminated. How many?
Well, I want to clarify what I said. I actually said that the allocation to salary and wages this year is informed by past experiences.
Okay.
I did not say they were eliminated. I just said the amount that was allocated is informed by our past spending.
How many positions were eliminated corporate-wide as a result of the practice you just described?
Through the chair, through the practice that we described, there was actually very few positions that were identified and eliminated. If a position was intended to be filled for the course of the year, at some point in the course of the year, but it was currently vacant, that position would remain in the program only in the extent where it was understood and reflected that there wouldn't be an opportunity to fill it over the course of the year, would we have taken it out, and if the intention was to fill it in the following year, ensure that it was reflected in the outlooks.
Okay, so how many?
I don't have the exact number on me. I think it was limited to 20 to 30 tops and mostly within a few areas.
Thank you. See, that was painless.
There we go. That was painless. But here we open it up to committee members. So Councillor Layton.
So, because I've been seeing some of this back and forth, and I think that's where there's a disconnect. It would be more fair to say you could calculate the number of FTE hours that are not budgeted for in the 2020 budget over the 2019 budget, because essentially we took the gapping and eliminated it and said we're just hiring later in the year, so we're going to make the estimates for the salaries lower, right?
So through the chair, what we're trying to get at this year is that the focus of the numbers is what are we trying to deliver? What are the outcomes that the investments that we're making in are trying to achieve? And so by looking at what are the resources we need to deliver on an outcome, that was the focus of our budget. So when we looked at salary and wages, we were looking at the outcomes, what level of salaries and wages, how many staff did we need to deliver on that service? That was the cost driver. When you look at the budget notes for each program, that is what we're talking about. We're talking about what investment is needed to deliver on specific outcomes. We've gotten away from a conversation about gapping. We've looked at what are the actual resources needed to deliver the outcomes that we're
But will it be possible to see, say, if there was something from the Environment Office, for instance, when is it in the year that we're going to start work on something based on when someone's being hired? Like that's, like, is work going to start in May or is work going to start in December?
So that, through the chair, that would only apply to new initiatives. If it's a current initiative and the work is underway, the budget simply reflects if a position is vacant December 31st, that position is not filled January 1st, but it allows for the appropriate time for the position to be filled.
But then how will we know when the expectation is that they'll fill that position? Because essentially no work would be done on that file until the position was filled, but is there a 6-month delay in hiring a position like that because of, what would have traditionally been picked up as gapping?
So through the chair, that's where I want to just redirect the conversation to what is the outcome. If there is a specific project or outcome that's coming out of an initiative, let's say a report, we are focused on delivering the outcome. And so the commitment that staff are making they're asking for the resources to ensure that the timelines or the product for that outcome are achieved. So it has nothing to do with specifically trying to decide when is someone going to be hired. It's about what is the outcome we're trying to achieve and what are the commitments we're making about delivering on those outcomes.
I think this is where it becomes difficult for us to be assured that we're meeting certain service levels if they're not predefined, as in a response back to a resident within 5 hours, or like when it gets more general, or it's based on reports coming back, or programs being implemented that don't have deliverables that are that specific. I just think it's going to be a little hard for us to adjust in to this particular point, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, so if I could just clarify when we will have the details on site. I'm looking at the budget page. I'm watching the Symphony of Services video right now.
God, it's terrible.
I'm not watching it with sound. Maybe it's better with sound. But when will the details be coming up on the page? There was a bit of a confusion about what you said earlier in the presentation about next week. Will we have the weekend to read stuff?
Through the chair, the materials are going to be available on the clerk's site through the agenda, I believe by the end of this meeting or by noon. After that, there's a process that's taking place between our communications staff and clerks, where they pull the materials from the agenda site and put them onto the budget website. I'm being told that'll take a couple of hours.
Okay, so really by the end of the business day, everyone here and everyone outside just has to type Toronto City Budget 2020 and it's going to be all there, along with the video Symphony of Services. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I want to again thank Chris, and of course Heather, Stephen, and all your teams on the great work in putting this together. And we'll be seeing everybody. Oh, we have to receive the report for information. So all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We just did. Thank you very much, and we'll see everybody next week at the reviews.